An aura grew in the room, as of a ghost swinging an unseen perfumed censer across the floor. It was a sort of miasma, like the dying breath of hallowed creatures. Some malice came to me then. I knew it was already there. I inspected myself. My wound was stitched, and nothing had slung against my limbs. My feet were atop an enormous rug, woven in intricate, tessellated lines, crimson, mercury, and gold. And in my hand was, see here, the knife. The knife from before. But how had it come to my hand? And why did I still grip it? Had the lady given it to me? Or had I taken it? Had I done wrong? Should I release it? Hide its cursed blade beneath a pillow? Yes. I should. And flee this eerie place too. Only I couldn't move. As if that walnut hilt grew roots into my palm. Veins running through me until they ingrained past the soles of my feet to where I stood. I was stuck, and this inherent malice was stuck to my frame. My fear held me still. What shall I do? This question of the knife blazed within me. But it was then that I heard the creaking of hardwood from Robert's improbably bare feet entering from the hall behind me. As I turned, I realized that his glare saw only one scene, and it was the worst possible circumstance. It was the image of me. I stood before Miss Boudreau, postured as if to lunge. The extended tip of a knife held only a span away from her delicate throat, as if I were to destroy her. This must have been the intention. "No!" he shouted. He came at me, bore me to the ground, his hands grappling my limbs, thrashing to break the blade from me, but perhaps out of shock I would not let him. It was all too quick. I hadn't the time to think. What should I do? How do I break from him? The fear which had throttled me since my arrival now flared as a kettle tipped over, returning at least a spark from the kindling in my weakened body. I couldn't know what he'd do with the blade, and only assumed the worst. So I raked and tossed, tightening my grip and bringing that cursed knife close. We rolled atop the crimson rug. I heard the shouts, like shrieking bats, of the flesh and blood Lady Boudreau stumble into the room. What little stamina I had wouldn't last, and my grip already tired. Robert had pried my fingers open and at last rolled the two of us into the nearest podium, its oakwood corner clambering just above my temple. An ivory bust of Hera plummeted by my ear, shaking the dust-ridden wood of the floor. It had slammed its nose and faced me, now beakless and cracked to its brow. Robert ripped the hilt from my palm, sputtering away from me in a convulsion of limbs like a dying spider, and shattered a vase behind him. Then I glanced at the spindle chair where I leaned my rifle. Had I left it there? I crawled toward it. Robert stood several paces away from my writhing body, blade tip hearkening in my direction. "It's true. That woman, that copy, told me true. A spy you are, an assassin of Reverend Polanski. Jealous as he is, sent to strike my dear Mistress Boudreau." He was nearly foaming at the mouth. Beneath the handle of the gun, I twisted around, meeting the man's fiery glare. His weight shifted back, as if in hesitation, before reeling forth, perhaps to charge me before I could reach for the trigger. He balanced himself on the nearby spine of a sofa, beside the reclining frame of Mistress Boudreau. Between us ran a morning dew, a more shining wet crimson than before, the gold trim pattern stained with the vermilion luster, the dark-woven filling shimmering in its moisture. I was bleeding again, of course. The blood was staining every thread. I'd lose consciousness soon, too. Who knows what he'd do to me then? His hesitation was my luck, but I hadn't long, and had no ability to aim. I huffed, pulling the stock to my hip, and my numb fingers to the trigger all the more. With what seemed as if, with my last breath, I said, "If you come at me, I'll shoot." The tip of the nozzle wavered about the space where the painting of the Mistress Boudreau lay. But at this, he jolted in front of its breadth and turned from me as a mother protects her child. And at once, a forceful touch rushed upon my back. All I saw then were tangles of black hair covering my eyes, and a warm hand wrapping about my own and pulling the trigger. A plume of smoke hid the shot, but from my experience, I knew it scented. Through that sudden fog, I saw her face above my shoulder. They were one and the same, they were. The Mistress Boudreaux, with demon eyes and blood-filled cheeks like hot coals, was now a terrible fiend. While the crack of the barrel still ricocheted between my ears, she crawled to Robert's coiling body. The blast had blown past his back and ribs, spilling from his chest. I hadn't noticed, but the painting now sat on the ground. Robert lay over it, and it above the copper, bristled and flattened back of a bearskin rug. She roughly rolled him over onto his back. Blood dribbled from the corners of his lips, and his fluttering eyes trailed to the ceiling. Though my ears still rang, I heard his rib bones crackle against each other as he breathed his final few aching breaths. The woman or fiend was silent as he spoke.
Liana, I see you. I ascend to you.
A flow of blood leaked into his streaming tears like red smoke, and with those words his pupils stalled and the light turned off. By some strength I knew not that I had, I rose to my feet and limped across the velvet ravine, the rifle's tip trailing behind me. Her elbows shook then, the tips of each finger shivering. The corner of her lips wrinkled, revealing every ivory tooth she had. I thought she'd devour him, but at once she snatched the long knife from Robert's dead fingers and slashed across the width of the canvas, across the bosom of Mistress Boudreaux. She then hovered a panting jaw above the torn painting as a weeping willow in the summer rain. But my eyes deceived me, for as she heaved, so did the portrait's flat pane, and the peony flower spun and fell, hidden from view. Her hands lay upon the gold-leafed frame, and so did those of the portrait from the other side. As her chin turned, so did it. Even the dark blood that streaked across her forehead and spilled into the corner of her eyes matched. It was as if now I saw her looking in the mirror, from the painting to her, and her to the canvas. Her voice then was far away, yet close, like fluttering mosquitoes behind my ear.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for bringing you into this horrid work.
She paused and didn't speak for a time. All I did, as she stared at me, was clutch my burning, wounded arm and stare back. When she spoke next, she turned her face away.
I hadn't the strength to do it on my own, only enough to share the guilt. It was I who unlocked the door. I'd seen you from the Palladian windows of the prayer room, coming from the fields.
A few beads of blood fell from the tipped ends of her hair. I knew not if it was Robert's or my own.
You know, we've never had visitors,
she continued.
He probably told you we did. He'd always tell her that.
Her eyes gazed intently into that of the portraits. As her fingertips brushed across its chin, a change happened, like she realized what she'd done. Like she'd escaped something unexpectedly. Her wiry black hair released into long, spindled curls, and her dark pupils spoke with a more radiant life than I'd seen from her. I hadn't felt the same way, nor was I sure I wanted to. It was as if she were a spectre. My own lips gaped. They tingled as I pushed breath through them to make a sound. What do we do? I said. She only sighed, though. I glued my eyes to Robert's cooling body. Miss Boudreaux raised her head. Her form seemed to bounce like a feather in the wind. The blood that trailed her face, eyes, and neck vanished from her, leaving no poor stain, leaving nothing but a glow upon her cheek. She glanced at the lifeless pain, to the peony, returned to the portrait's grasp, and said to me,
In a painting, Even the faintest flowers smell only of oil and tar. I must go where such petals grow and wither.
I hadn't the will to stop her. She hadn't made a sound from the footsteps she trailed to the bolt door. When I found the strength to lift myself, to stagger through that same door, it was raining. And as I walked the lanes of those peony gardens, through the chartreuse vines and 1,000 petal trails, I found no trace of her.